The late, great Gerry Ryan, he lit up Irish broadcasting. Anybody who's got an interest in Irish radio or TV certainly is aware of who exactly Gerry Ryan was, as, of course, are the greatest majority of the populace in Ireland. Like all great figures, of course, he could divide people at times, but for what he did for a living, nobody did it better. Gerry Ryan was this kind of mixture of an enfant terrible with the ponytail, even though I think he was in his early 30s when he had when he sported that. But youth must have its fling. And also, though, an intellectual, verbose, articulate guy with a forensic mind, which I think probably came from maybe some of his legal training. He basically had it all. He was radio gold. And we lost him at a very early age of, I think it was 53. When I think about Gerry Ryan, I think about one word which I think he mastered more than any other radio presenter I'm aware of in the talk show kind of genre. And that was empathy. He may have had this amazing kind of lifestyle on the one hand, but he very much had the common touch on the other. But more importantly, right slap bang in the middle, he had the human touch. He could be very human. And when he got you on a one-to-one, a caller that is, he had a way of empathizing. He had that magic of getting inside the caller's head and seeing the world through their eyes. He was amazing. It was compulsive radio. It was pull over to the side of the road radio. I'm going to miss this appointment, but I want to hear this. That kind of stuff, you just don't get it. It doesn't grow on trees. And in this era of kind of plastic radio, where we really hear very poor attempts to get people. Now, there are, of course, some luminaries out there, don't get me wrong. But when you are able to tap in to the human condition, and indeed the human spirit, human will, as he was able to do, and broadcast that, that is something special. That is way beyond forced hilarity, which he didn't need to do, because he was also gifted with a tremendous sense of humour. Now, the book exists somewhere in his book, in my little library here. Do I have it? Yes. Yes, Exhibit A, my lord. It's tough reading because I think people, particularly as we came to the bust of the late 2000s, didn't particularly want to hear about your cigar being kept at the right humidity, or the fact that you had a backstage pass for U2 having come fresh-footed from Patrick's in New York. You know, didn't need to know that kind of stuff. Interesting, yes, and it becomes then at its worst, at its most understandable, it's like a boastful. And at its worst, it's pretty childish. But there were insights in that book. There were. And I think at times the ego had landed and had maybe ran away with itself. But he was unique, and I want you to remember him. Well, it's up to you how you remember him. I met someone about a year or two back who'd worked with him, actually, the great Jim O'Neill. I met him when I was working alongside in the same building as East Coast Radio. And I said, Jim, what was he like? And Jim said to me in that distinctive Jim O'Neill voice. He looked at me, a slow smiling, went, he was a fun boy. So here's a little bit of video of him, recorded in the year 2000 by a student, I think. Gerry Ryan is very much unplugged here. And here we see the man and not the ego. And what a wonderful experience it is to be in the presence of one who quite simply is irreplaceable. Nobody did talk radio in Ireland like Gerry Ryan, and I doubt ever will. Enjoy.
I was a law student. It's a long time ago now. I must have been about third or fourth year law student, And pirate radio had become a big thing in Dublin and in Cork, if I recall, and Limerick. Dublin, Cork and Limerick were the three cities, and there was an interesting breed of guys who were basically just going out there setting up radio stations, not because they particularly loved radio, but because they knew that there was a market out there. We didn't have a national pop music radio station, so we had Radio Luxembourg still at the time on long wave from Europe, and we had BBC Radio 1. That's where you got your pop music. So there was a market there. They set up these pirate radio stations. I worked for two of them, ARD and Big D Radio, and unless you sold advertising on your own programme, you earned little or nothing. I got about £10 a week, £10 a month, in fact, if you were lucky. It's about the same as you get now, is it? And from there I went on to do some RT community radio. At the time RT used to travel, they used to have kind of a travelling roadshow radio station that went to various communities and university campuses, and I did that when I was in Trinity. But I had no ambitions, in fact, to become a music DJ. I was more interested in the BBC World Service, to be perfectly honest, or the world services of, for instance, the USSR or African countries. So I had pretty eclectic listening habits. I came in here on the advice of a student colleague of mine who had been given a job as a radio producer and escaped from the legal profession, and he said, listen, you know, they're looking for people, they don't really seem to have a lot. I came in here, did an audition, read the sleeve notes off the back of a Glenn Campbell album as my script, and hey presto, suddenly got a job earning £78 a week.
And I mean, you're one of the originals of 2FM.
So one of the three originals left. There's me, there's Dave Fanning and Larry Gogan, and of course Larry was here before we ever set foot in the place. Dave had worked on Big D Radio and he was a teacher, and we're the only three left. In my defence, I will say that I was very young. I literally came almost from school to RT at the time, and when I look back at the pictures, as we found a big bunch of publicity shots recently, you can see a big difference.
So what are the main changes in radio over the years?
I think the main changes that 2FM have gone through, it started off as Radio 2, and it started off, you must remember, not only as an answer to the pirate radio stations and as an answer to the direct competition of pop music programming which was coming on stream, not just in radio but in television, but it also was, you know, inevitably going to be another arm of the national broadcaster, and as such we legislatively had to, you know, deal with the requirements to keep our broadcasting within the public service remit, educate, entertain and inform. Now that's not always easy when you're dealing in a competitive pop music radio environment. And the big boys that we were up against were people like FM 104, which was classic rock, if I recall, in those days, and 98 FM, and of course in Cork you had the same stations. You had the same stations in the west of Ireland, and this was pre the smaller local stations coming on stream, which also turned out to be very localised and very competitive as well. So we went through a lot of changes where we had, you know, programmes in Irish, specialist arts programmes. I presented all of these programmes at some stage. Programmes on jobs, programmes on you name it. And I did an awful lot of these speech-driven programmes. And eventually we streamlined the station. I thought I was going to be sacked. And I ended up presenting a programme called Rock Steady, which was kind of like a junior baby rock show between 7 and 8. And that stage, the station became 2FM. And we entered the real world of competition against all the bigger pop stations.
So I mean, you've mentioned a lot of shows you've done there. What's been your favourite, or is what you're doing now where you want to be? Well,
I was presenting a programme called Lights Out between 10 and 12 at night time, and it was when the Led Zeppelin of Irish radio was in operation. You had Mark Cagney doing his album show. I was doing the show that came before, 10 to 12, which was kind of like directed towards older school kids. And then you had Dave doing the rock show. It was really, in my opinion, to this day, an unbeatable schedule. And I was really happy. You know, it was like being in a rock band, and we got to travel, we got to have a great time. It was wonderful. A very irresponsible time of my life. And I was asked, would I be interested in doing a morning show? And I said, like, at what time? As far as I was concerned, the only morning show that was on was Gay. And they said, well, you know, at 9 to 12. I said, up against Gay Byrne. And so it was kind of like, well, you don't really have much option. You're doing it. And the only advice we were given at the time was don't really have, to try not to let the interviews or the items go on for longer than the length of a pop music record, and which was, I don't know where that theory came from, but that was the early theory, and basically do whatever you want. Bill O'Donovan was the head of the station at the time with Cathal McCabe, and they basically told us, which was quite unusual for RTE, which was very editorial and senior management and line management driven. They said, do whatever the fucking hell you want to do, which we did.
Wow. Free range.
And at that time, Gay Byrne was going on holidays, as Pat Kenny was, and Marion Finucane, for 2 and 3 months at a time. Right. So that summer, we had the whole summer to ourselves, and that's how we turned this time around.
Did it ruin your social life then, having to be up for 9 or anything?
It took a couple of years. It did take a couple of years to get used to getting up that early in the morning, but I'm a naturally competent early riser. Right. Does get worse though as you get older. I think that should be put in a record.
Gets harder. Do you enjoy television work? 'Cause I know you've done some television shows. Have you any plans for more?
Yeah, I love television as a medium, and I think without doubt, when you look at what's happening online and when you look at digital television and all these developments, television is an incredible medium, and it's diversifying to an extent that I think the days of the Gay Byrnes and the David Lettermans, they're sort of coming to an end. The diversification of television is going to become so exotic and so extraordinarily wide that you can't but pay attention to television. But working in television as a medium is much more difficult, I think, and much less satisfying than working in radio. And am I doing something in, for instance, the autumn schedule? Yes, I hope so. There's a couple of projects that we're looking at. One of them involves myself and a number of independent film and television producers and RTE, and I'm quite excited about that. I don't think television is as easy to do either as radio. Many people have often said that the best television is on radio because the pictures are in your head. Yeah. You know, and I suppose when you have a program like the Gerry Ryan Show, you would tend to say something like that.
So what is it you love most about radio though?
I think it's just what I've just said. I think it's that on radio, if the language comes naturally to you, if people take you to their heart, if they treat you as a friend, and even if they don't treat you as a friend, if they treat you as an equal and they're willing to listen to you and they trust you, I think the images that are conjured up are in their head, and that really is the best place to create an image. And that's what I love about it. It's so intimate. With television, there's so many different layers that you've got to get through before the message is actually received, which makes it much more difficult. It makes it, as a discipline, much more difficult to come to terms with. Whereas in radio, it's that, and out she goes.
So does that give you a greater responsibility then to your listeners? I mean, do you feel like you owe it to them to get it right? And
well, first of all, I love radio. I have a deep and passionate love of radio, and I think Gay Byrne will say the same thing. I think Chris Evans says the same thing. And it's the immediacy of it, of the live programme, the sense of the audience that you can have, the fact that you don't stop. And I do feel a responsibility, but it's not a responsibility that's easy to describe. The responsibility is not to entertain them or to talk down to them or to inform them or educate them. The responsibility that I feel is to be Gerry Ryan. And Gerry Ryan has changed quite a bit over the years, and I think the best thing that I can do is, like, as Howard Stern said, he wasn't talking about his genitals when he named the book Private Parts. He was talking about telling people about yourself. And I think if you do that and you're true to that, the message will be received loud and clear.
So who do you listen to on radio then?
Who do I listen to on the radio? Well, I listen to Morning Ireland when I'm on the way in. I channel surf quite a bit from Gareth, obviously, in the morning, because he's on before us. Like to hear what's going on there. I listen to BBC Radio 4 for their slant on the news. And then later on in the day, I'll channel surf quite a bit as well. I enjoy Eamon Dunphy on Today FM too. I'll listen to Miles on Radio 1. I will then, of course, I continue to enjoy the music output, the more unusual music output of both Radio 1 and 2FM. I like John Kelly on Radio 1. I still adore listening to the Dave Fanning Rock Show. He still surprises me all the time with, Dave's just, his attitude to broadcasting seems so haphazard. It's still fresh. And then I think, there's a lot happening in the independent world as well. I think if you're blinkered and don't listen, I listen to an awful lot of radio from all over the country. I'd love to get a chance to listen to more local radio stations that you can't receive in Dublin, because I think that that's where a lot of the new development of radio is happening, and I don't get a chance to unless I'm travelling around.
So it's all research for you, really. You're kind of working constantly for ideas and...
I am a sponge for information, useless and valuable.
So, have you got a large production team working on the Gerry Ryan show?
Well, for 15 hours of broadcasting, we have a small production team. We have 3 producers. We have 2 broadcasting assistants who are pivotal. They're the ones on the phones. They're taking the calls. They can decide what's going to happen next, literally on the program. We have Brenda Donoghue, of course, is away on maternity leave. She'll be back in August. Reg Luby, who's in taking Brenda's place at the moment. And that's really basically it. We've a couple of people who add to the programme on occasion. Now compare that to the Pat Kenny show or the Marion Finucane show or the Joe Duffy show. It's a small team and they work their asses off. And there's a big burnout factor. We have to rock and roll. They have to enjoy themselves because if they don't have distraction, you wouldn't last more than 3 months here.
So who comes up with all your ideas? Who comes up with today's topic of conversation is?
Well, it's kind of run quite like a newspaper. We have an editorial meeting directly after the programme, and we don't really look back on the programme and go, did that work or didn't that work? Now, some people may say, well, maybe, Gerry, the programme would be better if you did that. We don't do that. We always think forward. And we have a look at what the programme has brought to that meeting, what calls have been generated. Then the researchers may be working on independent projects that are outside it, like Reg going off, for instance, today, following up the girl who's getting married in a couple of weeks' time. And these kind of things, there might be something that was much more serious, for instance, like Kevin O'Connor reporting from the Central Criminal Court on the Catherine Nevin case. They're independent things that are obviously not generated out of the calls. Yeah. And then we have 2 or 3 other meetings during the day. Some of them are just with researchers, some of them are with the entire team. And it's kind of, the programme grows and gathers momentum up until about 5 o'clock when you've got to lock it down at that stage. And then you could come in the next day and something could happen, whether it's the fall of the Berlin Wall or whether it's the Catherine Nevin murder trial verdict, and the whole show could be turned on its head. Or the bus strike, for instance, today.
Yeah. So what shows created the greatest response? What topics have just been crazy almost?
Well, Irish people tend to react, I have found. Our listeners tend to, and they're a very large percentage of the population with the kind of audience that we're dealing with, they tend to react to pretty much the same things. Religion still will get the phones hopping. Interpersonal relationship issues will still get the phones hopping. People haven't really changed. We may be in the midst of a Celtic Tiger experience, but people really are pretty much the same as they ever were. They still worry about what their husband's doing or their wife is doing. They still worry about what happens when you die. They still worry about what am I going to do because I haven't got enough money. They still like sex and drugs and rock and roll. So it's there, the same things are there. It's just that we're a little bit more grown up, I think, than we used to be as a nation. So you've got to reflect that.
It's an everlasting format, really. So what's the worst thing that's happened to you there? Have you ever just totally dried up? Not that I think that's likely, but...
No, I have had days when, you come in and it's just, there's nothing really happening. It's a slow week for news, so you can't draw on that. You go to the next call, it's not there. The person hasn't turned up for the interview. Sure, that's those days happen. But because of the way that the broadcast has developed on this programme, because of the very natural way, I think, that we present the show and that I present it, I can tell people, I can just say, listen, I'm hungover, had a row with my wife, the kids are going mad, and there's nobody to interview, and the phones are broken. So I'll tell you what I did last night. And I don't know whether people are thrilled at that prospect, but, people are quite tolerant of it. They go, yeah, that could have happened to me. Okay, what's wrong with him now, Yeah.
That's quite good. That's quite nice. You've got a real relationship there.
I hope so, yeah.
Like at this stage, probably do. So who's the most interesting person that you've interviewed?
I think the most interesting person that I've ever interviewed, the most interesting interview I've ever done, and this was for a very personal reason, was with a guy called Yusuf Islam, who in fact is Cat Stevens, the singer, and he was boiling a couple of eggs and talking to us on the phone. And I had been a big Cat Stevens fan when I was a kid in school, and I loved the music, I adored it, and I thought it was quite extraordinary this guy had become a Muslim, had entered an arranged marriage, and no longer wrote music or performed music because it was against his religious teachings, it seemed to me at the time. And I remember saying, you know, these wonderful songs, you know, Father and Son and Peace Train and Foreigner Suite, Morning is Broken, cliched songs, admittedly, by today's standards, but when they were there, they were really amazing songs. I said, are you telling me that you don't hear songs like that even in your head anymore? And he stopped, and for one brief moment, you knew that we had touched the rawest nerve in this man's psyche. And that was the most exciting moment that I have ever had on the radio. May not sound exciting to the rest of the world, but for me it was. We'd got into him. We'd made him stop and think about something that he hadn't thought about before.
But a little bit scary as well, because he hung up.
Well, that's always a possibility.
Yeah. So your future, you see it still here at 2FM anyway?
I suppose you've got to look really back at Gay, and you've got to remember that at my age, Gay was only kind of sort of halfway there. And I thoroughly enjoy what I'm doing, and I enjoy where I'm doing it. I mean, I think that's fair to say that the Ryan Show did have an opportunity 2.5 years ago to go to what was Radio Ireland and what became Today FM, and there was an awful lot of money involved. It was a very exciting challenge, and we didn't go. And you know, I have to accept that if I didn't go, and the reasons are quite mystical in a way. You know, they're, you know, when you turn down a lot of money, because RT don't pay the same amount of money as the commercial world does, even though I am very well paid here. You know, I have grown up within this organisation, and I have a lot of affection for it, and I also have a lot of respect for the support mechanisms that are here for a programme like this. So, yeah, I'm here for the long haul, I think.
Gerry Ryan, thank you very much.
Thank you.